This is a presentation by the Buxton Civic Association. We have Heather Jeanette, Brian Harris, Jeff Dawson, and Brett Barley here with us today, so if you all would come forward.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here today and bring us up to date on what you good folks are doing on.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Sorry it took us so long to get this together after Byway. Just after we went to Byway in November, a lot of things happened, a lot of contacts were made. So we just, we felt like we really needed to redo the presentation with a lot more information. Heather's going to get to the majority of the presentation, the meat and potatoes. A lot of the things you guys are already familiar with here, just because you guys have been involved since day one, thankfully, and we really appreciate that. So I'm just going to step aside, let Heather do her thing. Both Jeff and Brett will also speak a little bit, and then we'll kind of recap some of the new information that we have found. So I'll just let Heather take it over.
Good morning, Heather.
Good morning. How are you?
Fine. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. So it's interesting to present this to you as opposed to an audience down south. So it's going to be a little bit different, but bear with me. So this is our purpose in going down there was to give a really in-depth overview of the FUD situation, of the naval base, of what happened, where things stood, and where we hoped it would allow us to go. Even then, I looked back, and the abstract for that was due in August. And then going in November, it was a completely different scenario than what the abstract. So it's really a rapidly changing situation. So my first job down there was to introduce them to Buxton, which is my hometown. It's my favorite place on the planet. You guys don't need that level of introduction, but here's what we've got going on, right? We've got the lighthouse, we've got Cape Point, we've got one of the most iconic surf breaks on the East Coast, we've got kite surfing, surf fishing. We have apple uglies, okay? Absolutely. So, I think we're a valuable asset, and if we couldn't appeal to your heart or your stomach, then I think we can appeal to your wallet. Not just yours, but the entire state's, because our little population of 1,500 people entertains over 50,000 people at peak season. Hatteras Island as a whole, based on the 2022 economic impact study that the county commissioned, our tourism expenditures are in excess of $366 million. We give back $31 million to the state. By that report, Hatteras Island plays a disproportionately large role in the county's economy. So, we got it going on down there, right? We also had an absolute dumpster fire of a former naval base that was leaching petroleum actively into the sand, into the ocean, and was a major eyesore, public health crisis, and problem that needed immediate resolution. And it was amazing how many of our neighbors to the south had no idea. These are Daniel Pullen's photos. They speak volumes. So you guys are aware of how we got here, right? It was a naval base under a special use permit from the Park Service. The Coast Guard then assumed the use, then they abandoned it. It was returned to management by the Park Service. It was a fully functioning community. They had a dance hall, they had a commissary. It was its own thing, and then it was our thing. The special use permit is very clear that it should have been restored to its natural state. That is not what happened. It was leveled to the ground, it was buried, and they hoped it would stay that way for the remainder of, until it was no longer their problem. So this all kind of came to a head a little over a year ago. The storm events made the area really, really prevalent. I've been there my entire life, and I'm going to tell you that I didn't have any idea about it. I don't live on Lighthouse Road. I live over in the woods. So I was educated right along with you guys as this was going on. Visible sheen, strong odors, headaches. Brett had to take like 13 dawn baths to get it out of his hair and clothes. So as this garnered attention, people got involved. We started looking what's been done about this in the past. What are they doing about this now? I'm breezing through this because you guys know about this, okay? Here's where we come along. We're unincorporated DARE, right? We don't have a town manager. We don't have a board. We don't have planning departments. So we kind of had to become our own voice. And this has been such a beautiful example of when community members come together for a cause. We're really proud of that. We're really proud of the partnerships that we've made here in other parts of the state. It shows, you know, when you use a collective voice and you do it in a way that is seeking help instead of just screaming at people, you can get some things done. So these are some headlines that point to that. And this is my favorite slide. So it was super fun to go into a room in Wilmington full of Army Corps of Engineer people who had just been talking about interagency collaboration and harmony and working together, and get up here and go, that's really great, but that's not what we've felt for the past 9 months. We've felt a lot of finger pointing and blame shifting and kind of, that's not my problem. And we were left wondering, well, whose is it? So they did some things. The beach looks completely different now. Even though they still maintain the fact that under their wording and under their authority, they could not remove the physical hazards unless they had to do so to get rid of the contaminants, which is what happened, fortunately. So the Army Corps, as part of their rapid phase 1 response, was able to go down and remove most everything that were in those photos. You know, they said that because it was left safe at the time, that was why their wording read that way. We have to wonder, was that really a safe way to leave it? I think not. But here we are. So they have come. We look forward to next month having a more formal Restoration Advisory Board named. We look forward to more formal and consistent interaction with the Army Corps, with the Park Service, with the board here, with all the stakeholders to make sure that this stays something on someone's radar until it's done really to completion. So they've removed a ton of contaminated sand, water, structure. It's looking good. So that was a very sped up version of the history of the FUD site because, again, you guys have been there with us. But here we shift from, okay, here was a problem. What's a lesson that we've taken from it? Why did this happen? Why did a nothing kind of storm event expose all of this? And what does that mean going forward? We need beach stabilization, and we need it yesterday. Yesterday. And this is where I tapped out because I'm not going to speak to a room of coastal engineers down there or you guys about these words. You know, they were throwing words around, turbidity curtain down there. I was like, could have put that in my slideshow. That's a cool one. You know, I don't know about this, but my friends behind me know a lot more about it. So I would love for you to hear from them.
Hey, Jeff.
Good afternoon, or almost afternoon anyway. Thank y'all for giving us this opportunity to come up and talk publicly about this. As Heather said, we went down to the BIRO conference and gave this little speech, and it was received very well. So my part of this is I just kind of give a brief history of Hatteras Island, how the sand moves around, you know, because that's what we're talking about, sand. Hatteras Island was formed over thousands of years. Thank you.
That's
keep
your
it.
sign.
Yeah. Hatteras Island was formed over thousands of years of sand washing over a shallow place, leaves, sediment soils behind. Our soils, according to the Park Service and government, come from the tributaries out of the bay, where Heather made me this little map so that I could talk. All the green check marks you see, well, up north in Virginia anyway, are dams. So if our soils and sediments come out of tributaries out of the bay, if you put dams in there, those soil and sediments can no longer travel down and hit the Labrador Current where it meets the Gulf Stream and wash over Hatteras Island, thereby replenishing the beaches naturally the way it was formed originally. There's four major things that I would like to discuss that I think are, taking the sand out of the littoral system before it ever even gets to us. Number one, the dams up in Virginia. According to the Park Service, that's where our soils come from. If you don't allow the soils to get there, it doesn't come to us. Number two is the terminal groin that was built in Oregon Inlet that interrupts the littoral current, damaging the natural process, no longer allowing it reflects energy and doesn't allow the Labrador to bring us our natural sand replenishment. So there's two ways. Now, another one is we've dredged both inlets, and I'm all for dredging the inlets. We're a fishing community. We should keep it open. I'm all for keeping the inlets open. But let's not take the sand out of the inlets and go build bird islands in the sound with it and then count our bird numbers and blame us for, not managing our shores properly. That sand would have naturally gone back on our beaches. We took it out of the system. And then last, but I think the most damning thing is since World War II, we have maintained a dune line, the 47 miles of Hatteras Island, and no longer allow that natural overwash that gives us our sand. It actually creates a barrier, whereas the ocean hits it, reflects backwards, and you get this sawing, chewing motion, and we're sliding into the hole we're creating. So you can't tell Hatteras Island to let nature take its course when we're actively doing everything on a large-scale feasible level to interrupt the natural process. Dams in the rivers, terminal groin in the inlet, dredging the inlets, maintaining a dune at a great expense to the tax dollars. It's very, my entire life I've been told, well, you gotta let nature take its course. But we're not doing that. And it's not really fair to tell Hatteras to let nature take its course while we do the exact opposite everywhere else. Do I have a slide where it shows scalloping? Yeah, there we go. So the government came in and put jetties in, which Brett's gonna elaborate on. As you can see, they held sand on the Buxton oceanfront for 40-some years. They were repaired up until the 90s, and when the government moved the lighthouse and decided that it was no longer necessary to keep maintenance of the jetties, we watched our beaches just evaporate. As you can see in the 2021 photo on the bottom left-hand side, you can see basically the island's fairly straight. Where the jetties are, it causes a natural, it's not natural, but it causes a scalloping on the leeward side. That's already happened. Those jetties have been there for 50-plus years. They did a great job while they were maintained, but as soon as they started to fall apart, we started losing our ocean. There's endless amount of examples of ships wrecking on the outer bar and the beach builds right out to it. My grandmom has newspaper clippings in her office still hanging up behind her desk. What we're here to do is just trying to, and I wanted to say at the Wilmington conference, is we're just trying to shine a light on an issue that we've created. And we're not here to point fingers. We're not saying you did this or anything like that. But, there is a massive problem that we as a community have created. This is very man-made interference. And us losing it is, it's detrimental. That I don't know if you can see Highway 12 in there, but that's our lifeline. That's, that provides every, electric, sewage, water, power, you name it. All of our stuff is under there. We can't go to work, can't generate those tax dollars for the county. It behooves us to do something proactively as opposed to waiting until it gets destroyed and then reacting. We need to be proactive, stabilize the shoreline in any of the many ways. I mean, whether it's jetties or reef balls or sunken ships or whatever, it all works. We just haven't tried, and we would like to be allowed to try. And on that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett to discuss how jetties have worked.
Welcome, Brett.
Morning, y'all. So just to elaborate a little bit on what Jeff shared, and obviously what you can see here in the photos, when the Navy came in and started the Navy base, they built the jetties. That was not to the public's opinion or option. It was just the Navy's going to do what the Navy needs to do or wants to do. So in doing that, they found out immediately that when they stuck the jetties on a straight beach, they didn't put them far enough into the sand. It eroded behind them. So then they came in the 70s and did nourishment. So they had built the jetties and then they backfilled everything behind them with beach nourishment. That worked for 40 years. And what we saw starting about 10 years ago, I mean, starting longer, but what got exasperated starting 10 years ago was that what once worked no longer works once there's holes in it. As you can see in the photos, that middle photo there from 1999, the early 80s, there's a huge knuckle of sand that is in Buxton. When you look at historical surveys of the island, you can look back to the early 1900s, and as the erosion progresses, it progresses evenly in a straight line along the whole coast until you hit the 70s when the jetties went in. And then all of a sudden in Buxton, it stops right there, and the rest of the coast continues moving back. And so, for Buxton, the only nourishment that we have had since the 70s was in 2017-18 and 2022. Both of those have provided to be like a great example of what the nourishment looks like with lessened jetties, especially because the nourishment in 2022, the jetties were falling apart at a much larger rate than it was in 2017. 2017-18 nourishment was successful to a point, and that was also one of our most aggressive and large swell seasons that I've personally ever seen. I'm a professional surfer, for those of you that don't know. I've grown up in Buxton my whole life. And what we saw from July and August of 2017 through March of 2018 was historical as far as surf and swell and energy goes. And the beaches held up, and the nourishment did what it could. You know, they could only do but so much fighting that type of swell. Well, in 2022, the nourishment didn't do nearly as well. One, there wasn't as much sand pumped, but two, there was much larger holes in the jetties. I'm not going to go into this part. And so here's where we get into the degradation of the jetties and why we're seeing less effect from the nourishment as the jetties are falling apart. In the 70s, you got whole jetties and nourishment that lasted until around 2010, so 40 years. And then nourishment in 2017 lasted a smaller amount, because in 2015, what we noticed, I don't know if you can, I guess you can see it, that center photo, January 2015, you can see the amount of sand on the north side of the jetty. That photo is taken looking from south to north. And then you see in October 2015 to the right of it, that sand is gone. And what we noticed as surfers that fall, we didn't understand it at first, but when you typically, with a hardened structure like that, you can hop in the water and paddle out alongside of it because it stops the current, the downshore flow. That fall, what we noticed, we didn't understand, but we were getting swept out to sea in the places that you normally held ground. We didn't know why until a couple weeks later when the swell died down and we had an abnormally low tide that there was holes all in the jetty. They were all below the surface though. And so then what happened was, as those holes formed, it's rusting apart, it was then exasperating the current. And once those holes kept getting bigger and bigger, then the current's actually flowing through at a higher rate than if it wasn't there at all. Think about, when you put your thumb over the end of the hose. If it's wide open, the water can flow through. If you start tightening it off, it flows through much faster. And so that's what we're dealing with now as, 2020 into 2021 and current day. There's much larger holes. There's still all those smaller holes in between. And so now it's eroding faster than if it wasn't even there. We built an entire village off of land, and not just the village, but the infrastructure, the telephone poles, the highway. All of these things were built up off of land that has been shored up from what the Navy did back in the 70s. But we've been, the Navy was supposed to return it back to its pristine condition, but no one was ever going to take the jetties out, but we didn't maintain them. So we've shot ourselves in the foot by just letting them go. So we have nourishment coming up in 2026, and we have a special opportunity to come in and rehab some of these structures and then backfill to it and do exactly what the Navy did back in the 70s that proved to work until the jetties fell apart. Now, what that looks like nowadays, I don't know. There's obviously way more technology. There's way more science behind it. I don't think doing it out of steel is the best call, as we've seen. But we have an opportunity to do something to save the lifeline, not just to Buxton, but to Frisco, to Hatteras, to Ocracoke. Whether the money that goes to Ocracoke is, on our balance sheet or not, those visitors travel through Hatteras to get there. The fishing community in Hatteras, the closest run to the Gulf Stream. Like, all of these things rely on that highway being open. And what we saw this past fall, there's nothing there. The beach is eroding at an even higher rate. And I would say, as much as you saw, you guys saw on the news the overwash that we had in September and October, those swells were minimal. That was nothing. We haven't even been dealt a true winter storm and seen the capacity of what could happen along that beach. I'm trying to get to updated photo. Oh, these are all Brian's.
We can go back.
So this is what I wanted to kind of bring to light. The photo on the left was taken by Donnie Bowers in 2013. You can see there's a line drawn in pink from what was basically where the first jetty is. It was drawn from where the very first hole in the jetty was. And then you can see in the photo on the right that was taken 2 weeks ago from where the first jetty in the hole used to be. And both of those lines intersect with Carol Dillon's motel there in the bottom left. So as you can see, what's happening is the beach has been moving back with the holes in the jetties. You can see it, if you go down there periodically throughout the year, you watch the sand move with every swell. As the holes grow, the beach moves back. It does not move back out. It can't. There's nothing to hold it anymore. And so now what we're seeing is, it's a little bit harder to tell in this photo, but if you look at Donnie's photo at the dunes, just before the village, you can tell there's a lot of vegetation. They're really flat. They draw out onto the beach. Even though there's not much beach there, it is elevated sand, even if it's under the water and whatnot. Whereas now what we're looking at, the dune line is behind the buildings and it is a cliff. When you come over the dunes north of Buxton right now, it is a 12 to 15 foot drop down towards the water. We're literally one storm away from all of that washing out. So looking at all of these things and understanding, like going back all the way to the 70s and seeing the progression of the jetties and how that worked, and then seeing the degradation of them and the erosion, it's pretty clear that, something can be done, and it worked before. There's no sense that it wouldn't work again. And this is our chance to, save the whole southern end of the island, Ocracoke, and all that entire tourism economy, because that's what the Outer Banks lifeline relies on. So.
And we've heard all the things. I've heard my whole life. It's not going to happen. We have a hardened structures ban. The Park Service is never going to allow it. We know that that's coming. And what we heard down south was not that. What we heard was, we've gotten variances. Please come talk to us. Let us walk you through how we did this. There are laws, right? And we follow them, except maybe when they don't make sense. And then we question them. And then we look at, okay, maybe this isn't working here. How do we get special consideration? We have reached out to Dave Halleck with the Park Service. Where does the Park Service stand on this? Is it going to be a hard no from them? And he obviously can't give us but so much of an endorsement, but he was happy to say that Cape Hatteras National Seashore remains committed to continuing discussions with local communities and partners on strategies to mitigate the impacts of erosion, including shoreline stabilization on adjacent lands, transportation corridors, and other infrastructure. So what we're feeling and what we're hoping to relay is that it seems like the right people are on board right now. And maybe the time of saying it's not going to happen, it's illegal, these people aren't going to do it. Maybe it's time to just take a fresh start and go, but how can we get this done?
No, okay. What we have up here, since our presentation in Wilmington, we got the CSE report. Once all this started with the FUDs, the jetty thing was a topic from day one. Everybody there told me you needed to fix the jetties. I didn't even want to think about it. I wanted to deal with what we were dealing with as far as the pollution, and if the opportunity presented itself, then we would kind of shift focus. With now our legal representation in D.C., he is committed to the jetties. So on a federal level, we have that. And then after getting the CSE report from 2013, there was just some sentences in there that after reading the report, we were just kind of blown away. So I'm going to read just two of them. And the report, we'll send this over later, I guess, to everybody, so you guys can read it for yourself. It is quite long, but, all right. Initially, the Hatteras groins were impermeable, but with time, severe corrosion of the piles allowed sand to leak through the gaps, reducing their trapping capacity. Thus, the effectiveness of the groins has diminished over time, accounting for some upcoast losses. Rehabilitation of the groin would serve to reduce the upcoat loss rate and restoring trapping capacity for the benefit of the village of Buxton. Whereas the removal of the groins, by comparison, would accelerate erosion to the shoreline salient. Salient is the term for bulge. And lead to a straightening of the coast between the village of Buxton at Cape Point at the expense of existing oceanfront properties. So what Brett and Jeff have been saying all along, science is confirmed. And that's just one sentence. And here's another one that was a pretty good one. And this was the Army Corps of Engineers in 1999. With the lighthouse now situated 1,600 feet inward of the beach, shoreline protection measures for the structure are no longer needed. However, it is apparent that the groins continue to hold a major section of the village of Buxton shoreline in place. Their influence extends to Highway 12 immediately north of the village motels. So, I mean, I don't even, what do you say about the report that's 12 years old? The whole report's pretty damning. And if we don't do something, if we just didn't bring this up, I just, we appreciate Mr. Rob moving up the beach nourishment to 2026, but we got 18 months. We got the BCA. We have representation at the federal level. We can get a hold of Doug Berman. I can have conversations with Lee Zeldin, the new chief of the EPA. We've been working alongside the Coastal Federation with the SELC. I mean, why not bring everybody together right now and really take a look at a variance on the camera permit to replace the jetties? And that's,
Guys, I was going to ask you to kind of summarize. You've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
We went surfing, we've had jetties, we've had corrosion, we've had accretion, we've had salience. If you could boil this down to, I am in charge, I'm the king, I have all power, what would you do? Would you replace the jetties? Is that what I'm hearing? I'm trying to figure it out again.
I've heard two things prior to this last one, and that's fix the jetties before the beach nourishment, before 2026, and also ask for variances to fix the jetties. Those are two requests.
Is that it?
Those are
Yes.
two, and he's just brought up a third.
What's his third?
Third is coming together, all of us getting together and discussing what he just went through.
Yeah.
Am I right, Brian? Am I on target?
No, absolutely. I mean, we're real worried about Rodanthe. Obviously, as we dove into this, and I talked to Reed Corbett. We've met with the Coastal Science Engineering Program at UNC Wilmington, from Duke, NC State. I mean, we've done the due diligence on all of this, and we're not hearing a no from anybody.
How many jetties are you talking about?
We don't know, Mr. Ross.
We don't
That's
know.
not.
And that's the thing is.
We're not coastal
It's
engineers.
not ours to know.
Bobby can address it.
So, we've got a lot of stuff,
It's a lot.
So I'm trying to sort
but
it out.
let me try to be a little more methodical. The jetties, everything they told you about the jetties working is true. Our engineers have told us that as well. We've been to the Coastal Resources Commission more than once trying to find a way to repair those jetties and have been turned down at each occasion because
The Coastal Resources Commission has turned us down repeatedly. Am I hearing that correctly?
the Coastal Area Management Act doesn't allow hardened structures on the beach. And the jetties that have been built in North Carolina recently were done under special legislation for inlet management areas where there's an inlet, and we don't have an inlet there, so we don't fall, and they only allowed 6, and so we don't fall under that legislation. And so for us to get a permit from the state, it's not a federal issue with the permits, it's a state issue. We'd have to go to the Coastal Resources Commission. We'd have to go to the legislature and get the legislation changed to allow that, or we'd have to try to figure a way to repair those under the current legislation that's there.
That's where I was gonna go, repairing what's there.
And we have tried that on several occasions and have been told that we don't meet the criteria. So what we have done recently is we've asked our engineers to go in and look at those jetties in more detail, find out what the underwater structures are. I'm not going to go into the details, but there's a rule called the 50% rule, and if you can meet the conditions of that 50% rule, you can compare. And so what we're asking them to do, which hasn't been done yet, was to take the full length and run of the jetty, see what's under the water, what's above the water, see if there's a way to make this and shoehorn it into that 50% rule. If there is, then we're at a place where it's a permittable project through the Coastal Resources Commission. And then the question then becomes, is the Park Service going to give us the permits that we would have to do that, even if the Coastal Resources Commission approved it? The answer is much like they told you. We've talked with the Park Service on a number of occasions. They recognize that access to their lighthouse and access to their park is dependent on Highway 12. They also recognize the erosion rate that's there, and they recognize that the damage that the jetties have done on the downdrift side have already been done. And in theory, adding a jetty now or repairing that jetty won't do any more damage to the park than has already been done. And so we believe, again, this is general, that we have a good argument with the Park Service to move that forward as well. And so whether we can get all of that done in confluence with the nourishment project that's coming out in 27, that would be ambitious, because we've got everything going wide open to try to get the permits to put the sand on the beach, and the earliest we can do is 26.
26.
Right? In 26, doing everything possible to speed it up and having all the agencies working with us to speed it up. To start from scratch with the groins and get them done in a year is very unlikely, but it doesn't mean that we stop, and it doesn't mean that they don't need to be done.
The CRC, there are two ways they can be looking at this with us. One, we hear you, we support you, let's find a way to get the exception in. Two, we don't like you, and we're going to use every aspect of this law to stop you and block you. Do we know which side the CRC is coming along?
They've been directly on the fence. This is what the rule says.
Yeah.
To meet this, you got to follow those rules. If you can meet them, you can do it. If you can't, you can't.
Find a way to beat that
And so-
50 cent rule.
So that's
Well,
what.
yeah, we're not
Now-
getting the, yes, let's find a way
Now-
to do it together. That's it, forget it.
At the same time that this is all going on, we have been talking with the CRC and some of the leaders at the I have about how do we get a discussion going about other tools rather than just straight beach nourishment to protect beaches, not just in Dare County, but in North Carolina. And, there's all kinds of stuff out there, but they all involve some kind of a hardened structure or some kind of a structure doing certain things, and none of that stuff is allowed. The first step, for the first time at the CRAC meeting that's coming up in February, there's a firm coming in to present one of those kinds of structures and trying to begin that conversation in the coastal communities where we can start thinking about that. Where that will lead, whether that's got political backing in Raleigh, what will happen out of that, I don't know. But if we never have the conversation, we'll never know the answer to those questions. And so
Yeah.
that conversation is beginning as well.
I get a sense that these four good folks are preaching to the choir, that we're all in the boat with you. Am I?
Sort of.
Sort of. We just, the choir seems to have a leg up on getting these conversations started, and that's what we're asking.
No, by
of
the choir, I'm talking 7 people sitting here.
As am I. Yes, you're the choir.
Okay.
But you have a seat at the table that we might not. So we're just asking if
Okay.
it's time for these conversations to start happening, let's start happening.
I see you, Brett. What do you want to say?
And acknowledging the 50% rule to the permit. On a jetty that's 50 years old, the county or state or whoever waited 45 years to see if it was viable, and there was 50% to repair. There has been 20-some years of time to do that prior. And I would also argue, as far as timing on building jetties and times with the nourishment, I would argue, for starters, you would only need at least one to help, and then you could work on the others on the backside. Because that's what we've seen. There's really only been one for about 10 years. The others have been gone. There hasn't been anything there to hold sand for a long time. It was really just the one. And again, the hole started about 10 years ago on that, and they were exacerbated from 2021 is when new sections started falling down, and then into 22 and 23. We've lost little bits and stuff, but mostly the holes are getting bigger. But so it's proof that one, and really only even part of that one, helped us up until the last 5 years.
Coastal Studies, they're telling us, do we need one, do we need three?
I'm not saying only do one. I'm just saying you can start with
what
one.
we're trying to do is figure out what we can do to increase the life of that project, because if we can hold those projects in place 5 to 7 years, that's all we need, because we've got funding in place to do the nourishment on 5 to 7 years intervals. And so we can do that. And if a 50% rule means we only have to do a portion of those 3 jetties, then that gets us closer to 50% of the overall value, and that's what they're trying to work at now. If they come in and say you need more than one jetty to make it work, then we've got to look at that too. And we haven't talked about funding any of that yet, so that becomes yet another issue. So again, we hear you. This isn't something that no one's acting on and nobody's doing anything, but again, if we're expecting to have a jetty in place by the 26th nourishment project, that's unlikely.
I will say, the 50% rule, I think it's just a feeble attempt by the state. They threw us a bone in 2017. I mean, no kidding. They maintained the jetties up pretty much every 2 years up to 1997, and then 20 years later, you're going to say, you guys, we can't repair them. They moved the lighthouse and they forgot about the jetties, is what happened. They waited 20 years from 97 to 2017 to do a study of the 50% rule. I mean, we all live there, things rust. To wait 20 years for repair, it's almost laughable. And I just think it's a very invalid argument on the state's part. I think it's pretty irresponsible of them to wait 20 years, especially with the 2013 report we have that pretty much laid out that the village of Buxton's doomed if the jetties collapse. And we're almost there now. So, and then on top of it, you got a flood site, so.
Yeah, and the government originally put in those jetties without asking the town or whatever. They just kind of did it. Jetties cause a scouring. If the jetties are to go away or to be taken out, the report says the oceanfront will realign, but it's going to realign with the scalloped out part, not, We're going to lose the entire oceanfront of Buxton. And that is through no fault of our own. We didn't put the jetties in. We'd had no say in it. It was just done. And Hatteras Island has been there for, my brother's the lead archaeologist on the island. He finds stuff from BC era all the time. So Hatteras Island has been there for a long, long time. It's kind of like the mouth of a river. The river delta grows. Hatteras Island has 2 of the world's largest rivers, the Labrador and the Gulf Stream, colliding where we are. We're a natural sand deposit. To watch us erode is man-made intervention. And these jetties, they've already been done. They need to be repaired, because if they're not, we're going to lose all of Buxton. We're going to lose Frisco, Hatteras, we're going to lose Highway 12. It's irresponsible to not do anything about it. And I know that we've been asked about it because we have literature from the old civic associations from 40 years ago asking for these things. So this is not a new issue.
And that argument has not generated any movement?
Not until we picked it up again.
No, I'm talking, you've talked now. Why aren't we doing it now? As you explained, it's not going to happen quickly.
There's been no
But I'm
movement.
hearing,
Well, you're dealing
There's
with
been no movement
scientists.
at the state level for removal or change or modification to the hardened structure ban.
would that be legislative or would that be CAMA and CRC?
That'd be legislative.
Legislative, okay, thank you.
And Brian, listen, I think we're on your side.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, I was in DC when y'all were having the meeting, talking to the legislators about the
absolutely.
Buxton site.
Yeah.
We're open to doing this immediately and getting in front of our legislators with all three of those issues that you've just brought up to us today. And I'm open to do this sooner rather than later. As soon as we can get in front of them, we'll make a trip to Raleigh and to DC as well to try to get some help there. But, you know, I couldn't agree with you more. If there's others out there that's gotten variances, why can't we? And we need to push that hard. And then bringing everybody together to see if we can come to some kind of agreement to make
I
things
have a
happen.
question. You all said variant, I don't make sure we're using our terminology. Can you tell me where they got a variance to
Yeah.
put in a jetty?
Yeah, help us
I'm not
with that.
aware of a variance.
Not a jetty, I'm the 6 hardened structure exclusions that you mentioned, Ocean Isle.
Oh, okay, well, that, yeah, that was all, that
Yeah.
wasn't a variance, that was legislation that specifically allowed those.
Okay,
Okay.
fine. Well, same thing, yeah. Yeah, if them, why not us? You said it right here.
And we don't, you know, the big thing is with the camera laws, that we understand how they cause the scalloping on the south end and north end, and, you know, we understand Redanti, we're fixing what's already in place. You know, we don't want to see jetties across Hatteras by any means. And I will say that, you guys all know John Hooper very well.
Yep.
He was the commissioner during the time of the lighthouse move. He's in Florida right now. He wanted to be here today with us. So he would love to help this cause, and I told him I was going to pull him out of retirement. He wasn't really too happy about it, but he's willing to get involved in this. He would like to speak with you
We'll
guys.
take all the help we can get.
Yeah, yeah. And
That's all we're asking for.
We don't mean to sound combative. We're here because we believe that y'all will help us, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So thank you very, very much.
Bobby, I got a question. So we talked about the 50% rule. Products on hardened structures, 50% damage and less, we can't do anything. Are they going to take in consideration the 20-foot that's below sand that they put the structure down on those jetties?
That's exactly what we hope our argument is going to be, because I think what they have done in the past is when they calculated that, they looked at the surface. We've asked the engineers to take those things into account, do the calculation of what's left of the overall depth, not from the top to the bottom of the pile that's in the sand, see where that comes in, and then assuming that comes in favorable, we can go back and argue, whoa, you haven't examined the full jetty. The jetty is more than just what you can see, and at 50%, we still come in with that requirement. If we can do that, then that's a sort of an easy entree into doing that repair.
Yeah, and it
that's
goes
our goal.
into the
Also what's
dune
buried in
line
the beach,
too.
too.
We don't think their math is mathing on that. We're with you guys.
And so when are we going to hear about from the engineers on that?
They're doing the work now. I don't know, Dave, do you?
They're working on the FEMA stuff, just trying to get it
I mean,
done today. So it's gonna
we
be-
tasked them with that project back in the fall, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know where they are in the process.
Okay, because that's the first thing we got to do.
For sure.
Guys,
Thank you,
y'all.
guys.
I got to go back to work.
That was an excellent presentation.
thank you.
Very impressive.
Yeah, thanks for your time. We appreciate you guys. You guys, as far as I'm concerned, you're the only government I have any faith in right now. You know, I don't think Raleigh's going to help us out too much. You know, I think they're going to have to get checkmated in all this. And I just, the 2017, the 50% rule after 20 years of not maintaining them, it's pretty laughable.
And not seeing what's underwater or buried in the beach, only looking at what you can see, it's kind of silly.
Thank you.
Thank you,
brother.
guys.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, y'all.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.